once again. So, today's topic of discussion is Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. So, certainly we know about Wuthering Heights being published in the 1847, that is mid-Victorian age, that began with the reign of Queen Victoria in 1837, and gradually with a span of 70 years, we see it ended by the year 1901. Now, talking about Emily Bronte, she belongs to the Bronte sister family. Another two sisters are Charlotte Bronte and Anne Bronte. So today's focus will be only Emily Bronte, and we also know that all the three sisters used male pseudonym to get their works published, and certainly Emily Bronte's male pseudonym was Elizabeth. So we see that she was born in the year 1818 in Thornton, Yorkshire, and their father was a ordinary clergyman whose name was Patrick Bronte, and her mother was Maria Branwell. Now, talking about her only novel, which was published in 1847, we find a central character named Heathcliff. Now, Heathcliff is not only the main character, but also we see that he becomes the central to the plot which revolves around him, his events and his actions. So certainly before we enter into the Wuthering Heights, so when he arrives at Wuthering Heights, before that it is important for us to understand that how many families were there in this particular plot. There were two families in the plot. One is the Earnshaw, another is the Linton family. So among the Earnshaw family, we find Mr. Earnshaw, we find Heathcliff, who had been taken under the guardianship of Earnshaw, and his two children are Catherine and Hindley. Next we see is the Linton family. So from the Linton family we have Isabella, we have Edgar, and strikingly we have two narrators, which makes this work very significant. So Tennant Lockwood talks about or kind of carries the narration in a very present tone, while Nellie takes the plot narrative in the tone of past. Apart from all these characters, we see there are certain minor characters who are Catherine too, the child of Catherine and Edgar, and we see Linton the son of Heathcliff and Isabella. So these characters play a very important role in Wuthering Heights. So talking about these characters, we see that Heathcliff is firstly the main character of the novel, around whom the time and space and plot and everything revolves. And we see that, as he arrives at the Wuthering Heights as a dark and dirty foundling, or kind of a gypsy posture and nature and behavior, we see that by the end of the plot he becomes a gentleman, a more recognized one, and of course from shifting from a dirty dark fellow to a landlord at the end, we see how far his actions and events are taking place amidst the Earnshaw and the Linton family. Now we'll talk about the general outline, the setting, the period of action, the theme and plot. Now, talking about the setting, we see that the scene of the Wuthering Heights, from the time Heathcliff arrives, is laid in the bleak moorland country of the West Riding of Yorkshire. So we see that this bleak moorland is constantly recurring in all the chapters. Now, talking about the span or the time period of this novel, we see it is centering from 1778 to 1802. So certainly a very long period. Now, why such a period of action has been segmented in this novel? Because it is important for us to understand from the time from when Heathcliff entered Wuthering Heights, he left Wuthering Heights, and he came back superior and powerful, and what caused the end. So this chronology stands extremely significant in arranging the plot. Now, talking of the Victorian social parameters, we see that this span of 1778 to 1802, we see that Victorian time and space is witnessing the Industrial Revolution, the onset or the early phases of Industrial Revolution in England. Certainly it is bringing certain opportunities and abilities for all the people. Much likely we see that the aftermath of French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars. So we see a very dismal, dull, chaotic, turbulent situation in the Victorian time. Now talking about the theme, why Emily Bronte had written this particular novel, what was her intention, what did she try to teach and preach the readers. Now apart from the social condition, we see it centers around a particular character who falls prey to his own actions. Now the universal theme can be binary, that is good and evil, and love and hatred. So both the tragedy and romance play a very vital role here. Now the interaction of the two families we see are the Earnshaws and the Lintons. Okay, so the interactions between the two families exemplifies the coexistence of both truth and falsehood, evil and good, love and hatred, health and sickness, and so on. So we see the journey of how Heathcliff conquers Wuthering Heights at the end. So as a reader, we see the conflict in his mind, the conflict in his actions, and all these actions are centered around his demanding love for Catherine. So if we talk about the plot and what do we understand of it, we see that it revolves around the hero Heathcliff, who is initially arriving as a very nasty, as very dirty, as a very gypsy character. But towards the end, we find an evolved person who understands and accepts the mistakes he has made. And we see a very wild, stormy character for his demanding love of Catherine. Now, if we talk about the plot in general, so from the Earnshaw family, we see there are two children. We see in the first stage we are meeting the two children, Hindley and Catherine. So these are the two children of the Mr. Earnshaw. Now we see gradually Heathcliff comes to associate with these two children, but however Hindley is not able to recognize or position him as someone very similar to their family. So seeing his very rugged, tough, dirty characteristics, he finds it very difficult for him to position or find a comfort with Heathcliff. So we see there is a gradual turn point of Hindley. So Hindley gradually gets a distaste of Heathcliff. So he arranges certain events which causes him worry, tension and stress. So we see that there is a growing hatred or dislike towards Heathcliff. Now meanwhile, amidst the cosmos of Hindley and Heathcliff, we see there is a very platonic relationship going on between Catherine and Heathcliff. So this is the most important part of the first stage, where we see the development of the affections and emotions between Catherine and Heathcliff. Now, gradually, as the plot shifts, we see during the second stage, Hindley is getting married and he comes with his wife Frances, who actually ill treats Heathcliff and is not being able to assimilate with Heathcliff and his bond with his sister Catherine. Now we see Frances dies giving birth to Hareton, who is the child of Hindley, and definitely we see, Catherine getting acquaintance with Edgar and Isabella, which is disliked by Heathcliff. So Heathcliff dies straight in even more pitiable situation as Catherine makes more cordial relationship with Edgar and his sister Isabella from the Linton family at the Thrushcross Grange. Now eventually we see that Heathcliff is being kind of lesser recognizable, and he is unable to tolerate the growing bond between Catherine and Edgar, so he eventually decides to leave Wuthering Heights. And we see that meanwhile, before he comes, Catherine is being more compassionate about Edgar because he is definitely a comparative character to Heathcliff, because Edgar is more cordial, more gentleman, more sophisticated as compared to Heathcliff, who is actually irredeemable. So he leaves the Wuthering Heights and returns a few years later as a well-bred gentleman. But by the time he returns, he witnesses that Catherine is married to the Linton son, who is Edgar. Now he is becoming a very revengeful character, and in order to demand love from Catherine, he takes a diabolic turn, and now he situates himself amidst the Linton family by marrying Isabella. Now, after getting married to Isabella, he also ill-treats her because he didn't marry her out of emotions, and then she kind of gives birth to a son who is named Linton, and she leaves him giving birth to the son Linton, and to whom he later kind of considers as his own son and tries to be the only guardian. Now in the third stage we find the Heathcliff's plan of revenge, which is actually taking a wholesome turn or a diabolic turn. So we see that this relationship that was taking place earlier between Hindley, Heathcliff, Catherine, Edgar, Isabella, all are becoming opposite. So Catherine is now kind of in a very fearful situation because she never knew that Heathcliff would ever come, and she was apologetic of marrying Edgar. But now, since the time was too hard for her to get back to Heathcliff, she had no choice but to keep true to Edgar. Meanwhile, we see that Linton dies very soon, and Catherine is left a young widow in the very hostile home of Linton. Now Heathcliff himself dies at the later and is buried beside the beloved Catherine. Now before the death of Heathcliff and Catherine, what do we see? That the third stage takes a turn towards this third generation. It is Catherine II and Linton Heathcliff. Now who is Linton Heathcliff? As we had talked earlier, Linton Heathcliff is the son of Isabella and Heathcliff, while Catherine II is the daughter of Edgar Linton and Catherine I. Now meanwhile we see that Heathcliff, after Catherine dies, is still not sympathetic, but yet continues his revenge. Now what he does? He gets Catherine II married to his own son Linton, and that takes a toll over all his actions. So the story initially is told in the first person by two main narrators, that is the tenant Lockwood, and then we have Nellie Dean. So Lockwood is talking about the present, while Nellie Dean is talking about the past. Now, gradually we see that these two narrators are recounting past or either the present, and also we see certain memories and moments from the diary that is kept by Elder Catherine, who was the lover of Heathcliff, and certain excerpts from the diary are kept in open for the readers to understand the emotions, the events of Catherine altogether. And also we find the letters written by Isabella. Now, talking of the plot and theme, we see that there is a story of strange love and also strange revenge atmosphere going on. So if we see that by nature Heathcliff is unforgiving, intense and extremely revengeful. He is extremely dangerous for both the families, the Linton and the Earnshaw, because he was once a loyalist, but when he was not given the fortune of his actions, he became altogether an enemy, which distorted both the families. So we see that time has no effect whatsoever on his love or hatred, and the intensity got rising more and more as time passed. So we see that there is a very thin line of frustration in love that turns his mind towards harming innocent and timid people. Now, amidst all the love and strange revenge story, we see the major sufferer being Catherine and Heathcliff. Now, if we talk about the Lockwood narrator, we see that Lockwood's experience in the first 3 chapters is actually introducing us to the main characters like arrival of Heathcliff to Wuthering Heights and the strange and mysterious inhabitants of the heights, the atmosphere, the environment, and then shifts to the Lintons. So we see that gradually with the narration of Lockwood we enter to Nellie Dean's narration. So Lockwood basically functions in the novel as the intermediary through whom the eyewitness or the readers or the audience account certain events and circumstances that also is later accentuated by Nellie Dean. So Lockwood presents a more objective point, while Nellie's is more personal impressions. So Lockwood is not very impressive and seems vain in thinking, while Nellie is more observant, more didactic. So this particular plot or the story or the great work of Emily Bronte is situated during the Victorian period, and we see certain major characters coming up from the first, second and the third stage, and amidst all these we find a period of action that is set from the time of 1778 to 1802, and we are traveling through the journey and events and actions and mind of Heathcliff, and we get to encounter certain other characters like his demanding love for Catherine, his love for his children like Linton Heathcliff, and then his compassion for Catherine II, who resembles with Catherine I, and definitely we see that how far at the end, even though when they were alive they couldn't unite in the form of love, but as Heathcliff dies and is buried, he chooses to be buried beside his beloved Catherine, and both are united with each other after death. And so we can say that this is not only a plot that takes us to a time of the mid-Victorian period and sets a very socio-political condition and sets a hero who is both kind of taken as a hero and as a villain and falls prey to his own actions, but also we can talk of this particular novel as where love triumphs over the desire for revenge in the story. So the novel actually ends in a very positive note. So I hope you all have liked a very easy outline of Wuthering Heights. So for more detailed story or discussion or kind of a retelling in depth of all the chapters, you can comment down below. And also, if you want a separate video on Emily Bronte and her works and the Victorian time, you can comment below. Thank you.